Hi, it's the Soul Whisperer, Amy Shaw here. Today what I want to talk about is this concept of duality. It's just something I think a lot about. It comes up a lot in spiritual discussions in and around social media. And I think it's something that's just important to continue the discussion on, to continue thinking about, talking about. It's pretty popular in most of my spiritual circles, especially on social media, maybe not so much here locally for me, but out in the bigger world. It's pretty popular concept to believe that duality is a bad thing, that people that hold on to a dualistic way of thinking are somehow less evolved, that they're ignorant, that they're not awake or not conscious, that they perpetuate this sort of fear-based reality. And I want to talk about this because I want to dispel that myth a little bit and talk, maybe more about my particular shamanic practice and how I approach this issue. Let me start off by saying that I personally believe that this concept of duality exists all the way down to the atomic level of our experience of matter, of being, of quote unquote reality in this life, on this planet, in this world that we're living in. If we turn to science and we look at what we know about the atom, I certainly have taken anatomy and physiology and chemistry and learned all this wonderful stuff. If we look at the concept of the atom, an atom is made up of protons and neutrons that sit at the center, or what we would call the nucleus of the atom. These things are adhered together, they stick together through nuclear energy. The proton is positively charged and the neutron is neutral. It's just sort of there to adhere and create the matter and the substance of the nucleus. And then outside the shell, or what we would call the shell of the atom, spin wildly, fastly these electrons, and the electrons are negatively charged. They're actually attracted to the nucleus, the positively charged protons in the nucleus, and it's what causes them to become excited and to spin rapidly in the shells, is this electromagnetic energy. At the atomic level, we can say that we are actually electromagnetic beings, as is all matter, essentially. It's interesting because we live in this very rational materialist culture that looks at things like the chair that I'm sitting in and thinks, well, this is dead. It's matter, yes, but it's dead because it's not a sentient being. And so we want to ascribe aliveness or deadness based on whether something is sentient or not. But actually, if we boil everything down to the atomic level, then we would say that this chair is absolutely emitting a very vibrant energy, as the thing that constitutes this chair is atoms, and atoms are not fundamentally dead. They are held together by the protons and the electrons wildly spinning around the shell, being attracted to the protons. So we are all electromagnetic beings, as is all a matter around us electromagnetic. But my point in talking about the atom is to say that it's the positively charged protons and the negatively charged electrons, which actually are attracted to each other. And this, alludes to, at the very basis of all matter, this duality between positive and negative, and the two things cannot exist without each other. Without the negatively charged electrons dancing around the positively charged protons, atoms would cease to exist. And so at the atomic level, going back to that again, is sort of a metaphor or description for our larger experience of ourselves and the world that we live in. Atoms seek to become stable, they seek to become neutral. What happens when there is an unequal number of electrons dancing around the protons? The atom itself becomes unstable. It becomes either positively or negatively charged. If there's more electrons than there are protons, it holds a negative charge. If there's less electrons than protons, then the atom will hold a positive charge. So positively and negatively charged atoms, we call them ions, and in actuality they're incredibly unstable. They can potentially cause catastrophe and unraveling, and they are potentially unstable. So the atom itself, inherently in its nature, it seeks equilibrium, it seeks to become neutralized. So what will happen with those negatively and positively charged things is that's actually how chemical bonding can occur, is that it will seek out the neutral position. And so if it's missing electrons, it will seek other atoms that have extra electrons, and together they share. They enter into a symbiotic relationship where they're sharing electrons around two proton nucleuses. Or, if a particular atom has more electrons than it actually needs, and it's out of equilibrium that way, it will seek other atoms that have less electrons. And so it's this bond. This is how the bonding occurs, because the atom always will seek equilibrium in that sense. And so, for example, water, which is H2O, water is 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. So it's the imbalance in the oxygen matches up perfectly with the imbalance in the 2 hydrogens, and they fuse together. They create a chemical bond, and then this is how water is formed. So the very nature of the world we live in, the matter around us, our own bodies, is constituted at the very basic level of this duality, this nature of duality, that you cannot have one without the other. So the thing that I want to stress about this is, being in shamanic practice, a lot of the people that contact me are seeking assistance, with entity attachment. And so their worldview, their reality, their experience of what they're going through is put in a very dualistic way a lot of times, this sort of concept of good versus evil, benevolence versus malevolence, and this kind of thing. And so it's not for me, in my understanding of how I practice shamanism, it's not for me to take someone who comes to me and say, oh no, that's not your experience, or this is happening to you because you're experiencing incorrectly, or you're not looking at it correctly, and here, let's move out of this dualistic way of thinking, let me challenge your belief system, and when I do that, this is actually going to move you past this, and you're going to be free from it. That in essence is not shamanism. In my view, in my understanding, in my practice, in essence, that would be sorcery. It would be me sort of asserting myself, my belief system, in my view, over somebody else. It would be me saying, like, I know better than you, the way that I know and understand the world, in my experience, is better than yours, and here, just let me show you the way. I mean, this really would be like a guru complex in a sense, and it, to me, is antithetical to what shamanic practice is truly about. In shamanism, at least how I express it, it's very much about not having a belief system. When I am sitting one-on-one with somebody, it's not for me to bring to it my political ideas, my psychological ideas, my religious ideas, none of that. It will have any place whatsoever. And in a sense, I have to completely drop all that and just forget about myself entirely. All I'm bringing into it is my skill and my experience, and that's it. Everything else has to go out the window. And as I lean into the person, I have to listen to their story, to their myth, to their expression, to their experience, because ultimately that's all that really matters. So for me, in my shamanic practice, it's about learning the language that somebody is speaking, coming into the world, and being able to untangle all of that in such a way that I can work with them with what they're giving me to work with. So, for example, if people come to me and they say they have an entity attachment, I'm just telling you, people, if they believe they have an entity attachment and this entity is benevolent and it brings them joy and wealth and happiness and it improves their life, they're probably not going to seek the help of a shaman. The people that are seeking the help of the shaman are people that are suffering, they're struggling, they have symptoms that they don't like, maybe they're confused, they feel powerless, they feel afraid. I mean, they can be going through all these more heavier, sort of emotions and experiences, these energies, and they want help, they want relief. And so it's not for me to shift them out of that experience, but actually to lean in it, to be able to sit with them and myself be comfortable with the suffering, the pain, the confusion, the fear, to be comfortable with that, and to lean into it and gently work with that in such a way to help them come out of that, you know. And of course there's various techniques and things that I bring to it. That's the experiential side of it. But the belief side of it, I have to let that go. I can't come to somebody and say, well, no, what you're experiencing is not demonic possession because demons don't exist, and why do you live in this duality anyway? And I do not have the luxury to come at people like that, and I don't personally find that incredibly helpful. Now, on the flip side of this, I do understand the argument that a lot of people make against dualism. They feel like it perpetuates fear, they feel like it perpetuates division, and that if we keep seeing everything in terms of us versus them, and you're part of my circle and you're not, and we keep putting it in this paradigm with these firm boundaries, then we're never going to achieve world peace. Then we're never going to, be able to find the unity. But I feel that actually is a false argument in a lot of sense, because it doesn't have to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be in a situation where to find this peace, to find the unity, we have to completely let go entirely of these concepts of duality. Because, quite honestly, it's written in the very codes of nature. And so the proton doesn't say to the electron, oh, well, you just need to, stop thinking about me in terms of being the other, because you're just going to create a war between us and we're never going to resolve this. No, of course not. They learn to live and exist in harmony, and they seek equilibrium. Both are equally important, and so much so that the weight of each is equal. The number of the proton has to equal the number of the electron for the thing to be in balance. When it becomes out of balance, it gets either a positive charge or a negative charge, and then it becomes very unstable. It becomes charged and unstable. And so the point I want to make to that is that we don't have to throw the entire baby out with the bathwater and say that duality is just a thing of the past. We're moving beyond that. We're evolving beyond that. It's in our very code. It's just written into nature. We can't ever actually move past it, in a sense. For me, it's more about learning how to live with it, and calling something what it is. If there's a malevolent force out there, then that is a legitimate part of somebody's experience. It's how they're experiencing it. So the key is not so much into rejecting it or fighting it or segregating it or trying to cut it off or get rid of it, but actually leaning into it and allowing that to teach us. I've said it probably 150 times in the last 20 years. Somebody had to be the Judas, So I get that, that demonizing or vilifying or segregating the Judases, in the sense, isn't probably going to resolve anything. It's probably not going to bring world peace, and it probably is going to continue to create segregation and separation and these concepts. By the same token, though, I think it's important to understand that while somebody did have to be the Judas, at the end of the day, Judas was Judas. At the end of the day, he did what he did. And it is up to us. It's our personal responsibility to transmute that. And so potentially every quote-unquote negative thing that we experience is our teacher. It comes into our life to teach us, to bring us back into balance. And so if we approach everything from that point of view, then there's no room for victimization. And this is where the resistance to the idea of the duality comes from. It's not the essence of the duality itself. It's all the things that get padded up around that. So like this victim perpetrator, and putting everything in this mindset of, I'm good, you're evil. My knowledge is superior to yours, so therefore you don't know as much as I do, or you're dumb, or you're ignorant, or whatever. It's when we put things in these dichotomies that we start to get into trouble. This is where war comes from, and this is where all, this intolerance and all these things that non-dualists are arguing against. This is where that comes from. It doesn't come from the nature of the duality itself. It comes from what we do with it and our relationship to it. Now in terms of magic, because I think it's so important to talk about this, in terms of magic, we have to make really clear distinctions here, because a lot of the dark magicians will say this. They'll say, well, you people over there, you live in this duality, and you're actually insulting the spirits because you're only refusing, you're only willing to work with certain kinds of spirits and you're refusing to work with the others, and that's not really holistic. And that, I mean, on some level there is some legitimacy to what they're saying, but also we have to understand that these things that we label negative, or that we want to say, carry this heavier energy, they carry a malevolent energy, they seek to sort of tear down, to harm, while ultimately that is for our benefit, to teach us, to bring us more back into balance, and we can approach it in relationship like that. Also, I know that really it is us that does the transmutation. We're the ones that do the work. At the core level, we have to acknowledge that good is good and bad is bad, that evil is evil, and that benevolence is benevolence. Malevolence is malevolence, and benevolence is benevolence. And this comes down to the thing that I also preach a lot, is that intention does matter. People will say, well, you can't know the absolute truth. But there are absolute truths. There are absolute truths in the universe that it doesn't matter who you are, what your belief system is, what your experience is. You can't argue these things because they're universally true across all the other labels that we put. And one of these universal truths that really cannot be argued, it can't be disagreed with, it can't be argued, is that intention matters. Intention matters. Absolutely, intention matters. And so we have to look at that. Somebody could break into my home, tonight and hold me at gunpoint and, do all sorts of traumatic and atrocious things to me and to my family members. Would I say, well, thank you, bless you, you've been my teacher, you came into my life and ultimately to make it better? No, because at the moment that person made a decision to come to my home with a weapon and to do harm, that intention was very clear. And that person needs to be held accountable for that. And it needs to be called what it is. You call the spade a spade. That's not existing in duality. Okay? But what I do with that traumatic experience, how I transmute that and allow it to be a teacher to me, that's my work. See, that's about me. It's not about the other person. And so this is the thing that I think a lot of non-dualists get confused about. Is they don't have an answer to that, and in reality, it's because they don't understand the basic concept that intention does matter, that we have to hold people accountable for their intentions. But by the same token, we can do the transmutation and the work to process through that and ultimately allow it to be our teacher. So in that way, this is how malevolence and benevolence can live in harmony. Because at this point, it doesn't have to be about me, like, oh, eye for an eye. That guy broke into my home with a gun and he did all this to me. Now he needs to pay. He needs to fry in the electric chair. He needs to, it's having these sort of vengeful eye for an eye. Yes, out of that duality comes that, if we allow that to come forth. But it's up to us to do the transmutation, to come to a place of forgiveness, to come to a place of accepting the wisdom that comes through the experience that we have. Okay, so I just want to make the distinction that the duality itself is not the problem, because it exists even in our atomic structure. It's just part of nature. It's woven in and it's not going away. No matter how much you try to repress it, no matter how much you try to think that you're more spiritually evolved because you've risen above this concept of duality and you've embraced unity. And let me just talk briefly about unity. I mean, there's aspects of that too when we break it down to the atomic level and use that as the microcosm, the metaphoric microcosm for our experience in the larger universe. There's truth to that, because you boil everything down to the base level and there's nothing anatomically that's really distinguishing myself, my body as it's constituted here, and the chair that I'm sitting on and how it's constituted. Ultimately, it's all living, and it's all atomic parts just put together in certain combinations to create molecules, which then are put together in certain combinations to create, and on and on and on, until we actually see physical form and matter manifest in this world. So on some level, yes, everything is one. On some level, everything is a unity. Whether it's in the microcosm or the macrocosm of the universe, it is true. There's truth to that. There's unity. Consciousness is a very valid thing, and it has its thing. But it doesn't have to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be unity consciousness or duality, and that you can't hold both. Because in actuality, the truths of both exist in nature. It exists in the very fabrics of our beings, of our matter, of our world. Both things exist. So the reason I really just wanted to talk about it today is because I do get a lot of people that come to me seeking help with, what they call demonic entities. And in my form of shamanic practice, it's just not the place for me to talk them out of that, or to, shame them in some way, or say that they're less evolved, because why are you holding that reality? It's not for me to question that. My role is how I see myself is to sit with that with them, to allow them to have that reality, and to work within that in a way that will help them hopefully come out of it and get more of a sense of empowerment and strength and clarity and all these things that they feel that they're lacking. So you meet people where they're at. I mean, that's just my basic understanding of shamanism, is you meet people where they're at. And so I think it's actually sort of ironic that a lot of the people that are crying out against duality themselves create it by being intolerant of people that embrace or understand or acknowledge duality. They actually are creating more of a division, in the sense. And it's interesting it's interesting to me how prevalent it really is in the spiritual circles. I mean, this is especially true considering that the yin yang is probably, one of the most recognized, besides the cross, the Christian cross. It's one of the most recognized sort of spiritual symbols that goes back for centuries, and that completely embodies the duality. Duality itself is found in all forms of alchemy, definitely the Chinese or Asian alchemy, but the European alchemy as well. We see over and over in the artwork, the male and the female, and the sort of integration of those two. And so before I close, that's the one final point that I want to make, is that the integration, and that speaks to the transmutation. It doesn't say that you're eradicating the duality completely. No, it's saying there's divine masculine and there's divine feminine, and that both of those exist within us. And the transmutation process is in integrating those two things. It's seeing those things within ourselves, championing those things, and integrating them in such a way that we become more complete and whole people, being able to hold the tension between both, the black and the white, the positive and the negative, the male and the female, all these concepts of duality, that we can integrate that and express that in a whole way. So if you want to achieve unity consciousness, essentially, it's something that you have to do within yourself to be able to be comfortable with all the things, all the moving parts, and so it's not eradicating them. It's just learning to live in harmony and find the balance. So anyway, I hope that me talking clarified it for myself, and that it also gave you something to think about and consider. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I'm really excited today. I just came back. I had an 8 o'clock appointment this morning with a very good friend who agreed to do an interview for the Urban Shaman. So I just spent an hour and a half with her, and I just actually came back from that. So I'm really excited to get that interview edited and uploaded for the Urban Shaman. So go over there and check it out. The magazine is actually hosted at theurbanshaman.online, and you can find out a little bit more about our organization, our team, submission guidelines, open positions that we have, and all that kind of thing at theurbanshaman.org. So either one of those sites, they're cross-linked. Either one will get you to where you want to go. So I just encourage you today to go check it out and be looking for that exciting new interview that I will be uploading in a few days. All right, thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day.